Hey, everybody. You're all muted, which is fine. I think we're going to leave everybody muted that way. We're waiting for more people to get on here. Hey, Alondra, I know you're muted. You can unmute because every time people come in, I have to go to admit them. Is that how it works?
And you clicked on omit all?
I did.
Okay. Maybe you do. I didn't think you did though.
Maybe I'll just wait for a little bit. I'll just keep admitting them. If you all want to turn on your cameras, then I can see you, or you don't have to if you want to remain anonymous. Hey, Eric.
Hello there. How are
Good. How are you?
you? Getting along? You too?
Yep.
Excellent. Hi, Roddy.
Hey, Roddy.
You're muted, Roddy.
Everybody's muted. It works better that way.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
I don't know how many we'll end up having, but we're 100 people signed up. So
You're up to 36 so far.
yep.
Been a long time, Melanie. Hello.
Hey, yeah. You like my background?
Yes.
You get that through the NAR PhotoFi app that's free or included with your membership.
Nice.
This is a PMZ exclusive, huh?
It is.
Good stuff.
I'm going to see. We won't get up to as many participants. I was on a CIS week. There were 945 people on the Zoom meeting.
Wow.
So we'll give it a minute more. We're up to, I think, 43. So we're good. Oh, there's Josh Reeve. Maybe I shouldn't admit him. Right. Here's a couple more people. I have to keep admitting them. Dope.
Yeah, that is kind of a hassle when you have to to let them in. They're in the waiting room.
Yeah.
I learned that.
I guess I should admit Ben, huh?
And flip a coin.
Well, it is 5 minutes after 11 and we got a lot of ground to cover. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So for those of you that don't know me, I know there's a lot of people on here, and I'm Melanie Panino. I work at the Lodi office and the Lodi South office. We have 2 offices in Lodi. One's on the south side of the parking lot, one's on the north side of the parking lot. So that's why they're named that way. I have served, I've been with PMZ for a while now. I came when our office joined PMZ. So I've been in the business, had my license for about 24 years, but I've been around real estate for 42 years. I was a secretary for 20 years before I got my license. So been around the business for a while. I always tell people I was in the business when contract was 1 page and all blank. So it's morphed a lot since then. It's a lot of water under the bridge. So I don't know how many of you guys are brand new, but I just like to start by saying, you know, you can be anything in this business that you want to be. You just have to work for it. And you are in this business, and for the new people starting this business in a crazy time. So you'll have lots of stories to tell later on when you're the person in the business for 24 years. I've seen a lot of ups and downs and a lot of changes, but it's still a great business to be in. And I encourage you to get involved. I, started out as a secretary and ended up as the president of the Realtor Association. And I don't tell you that to brag about myself or pat myself on the back, but just to tell you that you can do whatever you want and just take advantage of all the education that is available to you through CAR and LAR. We're ready and willing to help you on that. So I'm admitting a couple more people here. I see them on the screen. So the first thing I want to tell you is I thought about this. So back a few years ago when Justice Kavanaugh was being interviewed and so on and going through the approval process with the Senate, they were interviewing a guy that had been in his law class. And he said the first thing that Justice Kavanaugh would do in his law class is tell people to read the Constitution. And I found that rather odd. It's like, you can be a lawyer and not know what and not have read the Constitution. I mean, that's the basis of everything that you do in law, right? Well, guess what? People are realtors and they don't read the contract. So my first advice to you is to go through and read it front to back. The good news is the contract was supposed to change in December of this year. It was a rather major change coming up. The good news is that's been postponed for a year. So no contract changes, basically because of COVID, there wouldn't be opportunities to do good training on the new contract, and it was going to be quite a bit different. So that got postponed to December of 2021 right now. I don't know if they'll move it up at some point or not. So, but my first thing is make sure you read the contract and read every form that you ever fill out. Make sure you read it. It seems kind of odd, but I have this saying, it says RDR, realtors don't read. Okay, so don't be the realtor that doesn't read. So we're going to go on. I'm going to pull up my share screen here. So I have been on lots of Zoom calls. I've never been the host on a Zoom call, so we'll see what happens here. I practice. I Zoomed with myself. So I'm going to try to do my screen. Hopefully it will come up. Share. Yeah, there we go. Look at that. So don't know if you want to ask a question, you have in your participants tab a little thing where you can raise your hand, and hopefully I will see that and be able to let you answer a question. But there are quite a few people on here, 48. So hopefully we can just get through it.
Can we
But-
zoom in a bit?
Can we zoom in a bit? Well, I tried that and no. So unless I can try to do something else here, it doesn't allow me to zoom in, unfortunately, on this. So I haven't been able to figure that out yet, Ben. Let's see. Let's see if, oh, no, that's not what I want to do. Hold on. It just zoomed me in on something I didn't want to do. Oh, that's going to be a bad thing. Hang on. Little technical difficulty, minimize. There we go. No. So my window just closed on me. Hold on. Now, let's see. I don't have the participants.
Enid just let me know we can zoom in on our end, so I figured it out. Everyone
Oh,
can zoom on
perfect.
their own screen. Sorry.
Perfect. All right. That will work. Hang on. I'm going to admit somebody else here. And very good. So now I have, hold on, because on my end, I'm looking at something. I don't want to look at it that way. So you. There we go. I think I can get it this way. We'll make it smaller. All right. So we're going to start off, and the homework that you should have received said the first thing we're going to do is we're going to write a contract for some clients, and they're going to make an offer on a house, and the offer price is going to be $300,000. It's going to be a 30-day escrow and an 80% conventional loan. We're going to split the fees 50-50, and the seller's going to pay the county transfer tax. Now, we all know that there's a lot of other things in the contract besides that. So we're going to start with our contract here. And I don't know how many of you, for the new people, if you've gone through any of the zip form training, but in zip form, you can do what's called MLS Connect. And when you're writing a contract, if you do MLS Connect, it will fill in all the pertinent information, like the address of the property, the parcel number. It'll auto-populate a lot of things like the other agent's name and the other agent's info. So it makes it a lot easier to do the contract if you use that. So just a little hint is I try never to write the contract when the people are sitting across from me. So if you've been out to a house and the people say, we really want to make an offer on their house, you might tell them, you know, if it's lunchtime, why don't you go have lunch while I go back to my office and take a little time to prepare everything we're going to need to sign, or go to Starbucks and have a cup of coffee, and then say, come back to my office in a half an hour or however much time you think you need, because you'll do a better job and you won't miss things. There's a lot of little fill in the blanks, and if you're trying to be personable with your clients and they're talking and they're excited and you're talking and they're asking you questions, you're going to forget to fill something in, or you're not going to fill it in right. So my advice to you is to try to do that, not with the people sitting in front of you. It doesn't always work that way. So if you don't use MLS Connect, you're going to have to fill in the name and the address and all the pertinent information about the listing. You should fill in your buyer's name. Then you're going to fill in the purchase price. And then you're going to fill in the escrow, close of escrow time. So it's either going to be on a particular day or it's going to be a number of days. So in this scenario, we have 30 days. You should be checking with your lender to make sure whatever you put in there is a timeline that your lender can meet. Now, you know, we all have these protocols we have to do for our county so we can go out and show property. And I thought it was really funny that said you can only show in-person showings to serious buyers. And I'm like, well, aren't all of our buyers serious? And who would go out and show a house without somebody being pre-qualified? That's what we did in 1980, right? So you should really have them pre-qualified and you should be in contact with the lender. So make sure when you're doing that, that the lender can, you know, if you want to make if you're in multiple offer situation, you want to make a shorter escrow, you're probably going to want to make sure that the lender can accommodate that shorter escrow. Otherwise, you're going to have to ask for an extension and you might not get it. So the next part is agency. So you're going to fill in this scenario, we're saying that it's dual agency and PMZ is representing both sides. So if you fill in, let's say that a different real estate company is representing the seller, if you check the seller under the brokerage name, it will automatically check your name as a seller's agent. Same with the bottom. So in this scenario, if you check both the buyer and the seller, it's going to check all the boxes of both the buyer and the seller. So that's really good. You can't make a mistake because sometimes people there would be dual agency and they would used to say for the seller exclusively and for the buyer exclusively. Well, the same real estate company can't represent two people exclusively because exclusively means the only one. So they made this so it's a little bit easier to not check the wrong boxes, because if you check them wrong, then you're going to have to do down the road, you're going to have to do a different form to clear that up because you have to have the correct confirmation for agency. So the next part is finance terms. So initial deposit. So we put in here $2,000. This is not the whole down payment that the buyer is going to put down. This is what they call the earnest money deposit or the good faith deposit. So this is their initial deposit. If you want to make your offer look more attractive, let's say you're in a multiple offer situation, you might want to put a higher amount in there. This is the amount that the buyer will risk if they remove their contingencies and don't complete the deal, if they breach the contract. So this is the amount of money they will potentially lose. If they're going to give you a check, you have to check the box, and then you would enter it in your disposition record at wherever that is in your office. At our office, it's at the front desk. Otherwise, they're going to deposit it directly with the title company by either dropping the check off or electronic funds transfer. So if you check the box where the buyer's going to give you the deposit, actually to you, you're going to have to make it payable to the title company. None of the PMZ offices that I am aware of will have a trust fund account. So we don't deposit those. So it never should be made out to PMZ. We don't maintain trust fund accounts. And there's reasons for that because nobody wants that hassle. So then you're going to go down. If it were an all cash offer, you would check that box. But this offer is a loan. So you have to do a little math for dummies and figure out what 80% of 300,000 is, because that's what the loan that your buyers say they're going to get. And then you should have communication with the lender so that you know if they're doing an FHA loan or a VA loan, because you need to check that box. If one of those boxes are checked, it will automatically check add another form to your file. So I was always taught now, remember, I've been in the business for a long time, so I do some things old school. So used to be, you could actually write in there in those boxes there under D, best prevailing rate. But everything I was always taught is not, number one, not to write that in, which you can't actually write that in now. Don't leave it blank. Okay, so this is a not to exceed rate. So let's say buyers can get a 3.5% loan. That's what they're getting from their lender. You would pad that maybe and make it 4%, and here it's 5%. Because when I did this slide presentation, the rates were higher. So this is a not to exceed rate. Same with the points, a not to exceed 1%, 1 point. This is a protection for your buyer that gives them a way to get out of the contract if for some weird, crazy reason, worse than the times that we are in now, a month or so ago when rates were going crazy. Let's say the rate goes up to 10% and they're like, I don't want to borrow money at 10%. Although I've been in the business long enough, people borrowed money at 16 and 18%. Now that's like buying your house on your Visa card, that kind of interest. So you want to fill something in there. You shouldn't leave it blank. This protects your buyer. Also, same thing with the points. Maybe they can get that 5% loan, but it's going to cost them 10 points. A point is a percentage, and they don't want to spend that much money, or they don't have that much money. So that gives them a way to get out. Now, the good news is that if you put those figures in, it automatically adds it up for you. Previous times that didn't happen, and you actually had to add it up correctly. You would be surprised how many people did not know how to add correctly. So that, then you're going to have make sure your buyers sign at the bottom of the page. So we're going to go on to the next page. Let's see if I can get it to move. Hang on, I got to admit somebody else. Okay. Oh, yep, there we go. Okay, so at the top is verification of down payment and closing costs. If you want to make your buyer, your offer, especially if you're in multiple offer situations, and that's still happening, you might want to have their verification attached. That makes your offer look more attractive. If you do not attach it, you're supposed to provide it to the other agent within 3 days after acceptance. Then you're going to check if you want the appraisal contingency to be any day other than 17. And then under J, loan application. The contract says that you have to at least apply for your loan within 3 days after acceptance. But you should never make an offer on a property without having a pre-qual letter attached. It's just not, your offer will not look very strong, because how can the seller count on anything because you haven't told them that you're actually pre-qualified? So you need to get that pre-qualification letter. That's the first thing that should come out of your mouth when you're talking to a new client. Are you pre-qualified? Because you need to have that. The next paragraph talks about the loan contingency, and the loan contingency removal is 21 days after acceptance. You can change that. You should be talking with your lender again to say, can you get that appraisal and get it back in 17 days? And can you get me final loan approval within the 21 days? If you've made a shorter than 30-day escrow, you're probably going to want to change the years, because if you made a 20-day escrow, you don't want to hold out for 21 days. The seller's probably not going to want you to do that. They're probably going to ask you to shorten that up if you're going to have a shortened escrow. So then you would go down, if your buyer has something to sell before they can buy this property, even if it's in escrow already, you need to check that box under 4B. That this is contingent on the sale of the buyer's property, okay? Sale also means closing. So even if it's pending, you need to let the other agent know that you have something that's pending, okay? That is required, and don't forget to do that. Starting on, if you want any other addendums or write anything else in, there's number 6 there where you can write something else in if you want. Now the next number 7 is what I call the who pays for what section. Okay, so this is what you're going to say how all the fees are going to be split. So generally the seller pays for a natural hazard zone disclosure report, and you can write in there prepared by Valley NHD. Now, when you get to a class that's going to train you on zip forms, which there's webinars on CAR if you want to go on there, you can have this in your template for zip forms where it's already put in there. A lot of things you can have in your template if you always use the same title company or you always put something into a contract, you can already have it in there in your template, and then you don't have to put it in there every time you do a contract. So here we're going to check the box. Seller's going to pay for the natural hazard zone disclosure report. I put in there by Valley NHD. Then underneath here, this says for any other report. Now, keep in mind, if you put in anything here that says you're going to have any kind of a report, like a pest report or roof report, your lender's probably going to want to see that report. So you might, doesn't mean if you don't put it in here that even if the buyer, they're going to say, oh, the buyer's going to have a pest report. They can have that report anyway. It doesn't matter if they put it here or not. They have the right to have all the reports they want to have. But if you put it on the contract, the lender's going to want to see it. And the problem is if you negotiate that the buyer's going to fix those things after escrow closes, the lender may say, oh, but we want those to be prior to giving you the money. So then you're in a catch-22, because then the seller's going to have to fix them because it's a requirement to get the loan. So you want to think twice about before you ask, before you write any kind of a report in there. So there's things like roof reports, pest reports, pool inspection report, anything. But I would caution you on putting that in there so that the lender can see it. Then under B, it's the smoke detector, carbon monoxide, and water heater strapping. Generally, the seller's going to make sure that those are all done. So we're going to go to page 3. You can check any of those boxes up there. The next part at the top under 2, if you want. And the next part is title and escrow. Now you need to know how those are split in the area that you're working. I know in Stanislaus County, I believe the seller pays all title insurance. In San Joaquin County, it's still kind of split. Sometimes it's all the seller. So you're going to do however. So that's one of those reasons, if you're going to go and work outside of where you normally work, you need to know what the normal split is in that area. And just so you know, there is a law that if the seller picks the title company, the seller has to pay all of the title. The buyer is not allowed to pay any of it. So you have to be very careful about that. So if you can't write in there half each and seller's choice, because that's giving the buyer's paying for part of it, so you can't say seller's choice. So on other costs, seller usually pays the county transfer fee. Now in our area, it's $1.10 on every $1,000 of the purchase price, but that's not the case in all areas. In Berkeley, it's something like $13 for every $1,000 of the purchase price. So you need to know what you're obligating the seller to. Then there's HOA fee. You'll notice that under number 4, there's certain documents that the seller is required to provide, and certain documents you can ask them to provide. Then you can put seller to pay for anything else that you might want them to pay for. Then you come down to the home warranty. So you can either the buyer pays, seller pay, you can split it. There's a not to exceed number. So when you fill in that not to exceed number, make sure that it's enough to cover the policy that you're asking for. Because if you put in $400 and the policy really covers $500, the title company's only going to split the $400. And so there's going to be $100 that somebody else is going to have to pay. So make sure that you check, because, you know, all the different home warranty companies, they change their fees from time to time. So make sure you're covering that amount, and make sure that you specify what kind of plan that you want. If they're going to waive the home warranty, you need to check that box that says or. If you don't have anything filled in there, then you're going to get a nasty note from the Sky Slope ladies, and they're going to tell you you have to do something with that, because it either has to be elected or waived. The next is things that are included and excluded from the sale. Sometimes you'll see in the body of the listing where, you know, the drapes that match the bedspread aren't included. So you could exclude those. Included. So you want to know, you want to make sure that if it says in the listing that the refrigerator is included, you still want to check the box, even though the listing said, because the listing on MLS is not a contract. Okay. So they could say they're going to leave the refrigerator there, but if you don't check it in the contract, they could take it. Same with washer dryers or stoves. You know, built-in stoves are considered attached to the house, but something that's freestanding, you're going to want to check that. And then anything excluded, pay a particular attention to the leased or liened items. They're leased or liened items, especially if there's something in the listing that talks about a PACE or a hero loan. Those are types of loans that the buyer can, or the seller could have used to add solar panels or insulation or dual pane windows, some kind of energy saving amenity. And while the loan says on those PACE loans, the loan itself is assumable, some lenders may not lend on a new loan with a PACE loan on there, because a PACE loan is it's a property, it's on the property taxes. So it makes the property tax higher, and property tax liens are superior to mortgage liens. So lenders tend not to like anything to be superior to their lien. They want to get their money first. So be very careful when you're come up with a PACE or a hero that may have to be paid off before the lender will lend on the new loan. So that could be an issue. So down at the bottom, number 9 says closing and possession. So the pre-printed time is 6 p.m. And then you would write either the day escrow closes or no later than so many days after escrow. So you know that your buyer is going to be sitting in front of the house with their moving van, with their furniture, waiting to move into their brand new house that they're so excited about. So the seller could technically take them all the way to 6 o'clock. So what you might want to do is write in a earlier time there. And now obviously they can't take possession until it's actually there. So if you have a afternoon recording, that's not going to be the 10 o'clock in this scenario, wouldn't work. Somebody needs to mute themselves here. I will mute this person. Hang on. Carol Collier, you need to mute yourself. Okay.
I lost you.
Yeah. There, I muted her. Let's see, where was I? So I think, oops. Okay, there, I'm on page 3 again. So you might want to be the hero and make sure that your clients get to move in right away as soon as they can, because they're going to remember that you help them get in their new house ASAP. So now we're going to go on to page 4. It talks about seller remaining in possession of the house or tenant occupied property. Be very careful if you have tenant occupied property, if the seller's wanting to move in it, because the tenant still has all the rights that the tenant has under the tenant's law. So it could be a little difficult to get the tenant out, and there are forms for that. The next part talks about the statutory disclosures that you're going to get from the seller. And, that's what I usually tell the people. We're going to get lots and lots of forms, and we're going to go over those. So nothing really to fill out here. Goes down, it talks about the natural hazard disclosure, the Megan's Law database. And I point out to people that there's a Megan's Law database that they can go to and look if they're concerned. I always tell them, I don't want to know what you find. Because if they find a sex offender and you sell the house next door next year, you have to disclose that to them, that there might be an issue. So I even tell my husband, he says, I'm going to go on and look at my neighborhood. Don't tell me what you find. I don't want to know. So there is a website regarding gas transmission lines. Then the next part talks about if you're in a condominium, complex, and it talks about how those documents are going to get you get lots and lots of documents on an HOA. Next part talks about the condition of the property. This contract is written that it's always as is, even though people say it's sold as is, subject to the inspection rights. And you could have a conversation with them about what inspections they might want to think about having down the road. There are certain limitations on those investigations. In the yellow, it says you can't cause any invasive or destructive investigations without the seller's consent. So they can't tear out a wall to find out what's behind there. And then you have to make sure that the buyer, sometimes they'll say, well, my Uncle Joe, he used to be a contractor, so he's going to do my home inspection. Well, here's the issue. 2 things. Does Uncle Joe have the proper insurance to do this home inspection? Because our home inspectors should have insurance, for 2 things. That if they are in the attic and they step through the ceiling, that they have some kind of recourse to make sure that they repair that ceiling, or if they hurt themselves, they don't sue the seller. So make sure that you read that number D. The next talks about title investing. At the end of the escrow, when they go to title, they're going to ask them how they want to hold title. You'll notice down in D, it says the matter of taking title may have significant legal and tax consequences. Consult an appropriate professional. You are not that person unless you happen to be a tax accountant or an attorney. So don't give advice. A lot of the title companies have sheets that explain the different ways to take title, and you could have those in your desk and be able to give that to your client or email it to them. They're probably gonna forget, but you need to remind them down the road. They're gonna need to know how to take title. It's not something that can't be changed. If they take it one way and have, decide, then they get advice later on that needs to be changed. That's pretty easy to change. But you should not be giving them any advice on that. So we're going to go to time periods on page 6. So the time periods for removal of contingencies. So the seller has 7 days after acceptance to have whatever is they're responsible for to get that to you. The buyer has 17 days after acceptance. Now, always remember, and I always explain this to people, what the days after acceptance means. So the day something happens is not day 1, it is day 0. Okay? So if acceptance happens on Monday, Monday is day 0, and you start counting your days from Tuesday. So Tuesday is day one, and you would count them out. Okay. So that's very important. So everybody's on the same page. So the buyer has 17 days. They basically have, Gov Hutchinson used to tell us it's the 17-day free look. They have they can tie that property up for 70 days and make sure they want to buy it and find out everything about it that is important to them. Because what's important to you might not be important to them. So you may not be concerned about, drainage, but they may be concerned about drainage. So you should never put off your clients about having any inspection that they want to have. So what happens if, then on C, there's a removal of contingencies with offer. This means you're making a non-contingent offer. It basically means the buyer has no reason to cancel the transaction. Now, they could cancel, but they're going to risk that money on the first page, the $2,000. That would be what they would risk if they were to cancel and default on the contract. So very, very few times would you make a non-contingent offer. That would be very risky. It wouldn't be something that I would advise people to do, and I would really talk to them about it if they wanted to do it. Okay. So what happens if people don't perform? What happens if you don't remove your contingencies after 17 days? So here's what happens is if you don't remove your contingencies in the 17 days, the seller is going to give you what's called a notice to perform. They can give it to you a couple of days before the 17 days is up. And you have until those 17 days, or if they give it to you on the 17 days, you have whatever's on the form. I can never remember if it's 2 days or 3 days to perform. So if you don't perform and on the item that is put on there, it's like, let's say they want you to release the appraisal contingency and you don't do that, they can then cancel the transaction. And the buyer doesn't have to agree to the cancellation. They can arbitrarily cancel that if you don't respond to them. Same way with the seller. If they don't provide you the things that you need within the time frame, you can also give them a notice to perform. Okay. This does not apply to close of escrow. There's a different form that the seller could give to the buyer. It's called a demand to close escrow. Okay. They have to give it to you no earlier than 3 days before the close of escrow date. Or if they give it to you on the close of escrow date, you would have 3 days after that to close escrow. I've only had to do this once. I called it the deal from hell. I represented the seller. So that's a form that you might end up, but that's the effect of what happens if you don't remove your contingencies. Okay, next, final verification of condition of property. So the buyer has a right to make a final walkthrough of the house within 5 days before close of escrow. And I always tell them, this to verify two things. The property is still in the condition that it was in when the buyer bought it. So the seller hasn't knocked holes in the wall or let the lawn die. And that if any repairs were made, that those have in fact been made. And you might, if you agree to repairs, you might want to ask for receipts of the person that did the repair or for the thing that was repaired. So it's not a point in time where you ask for the seller to do anything else. So the next paragraph there, 16, talks about repairs. If there are repairs that agree to be made, they have to be made prior to close of escrow. Then it talks about proration of property taxes. This is very confusing. My daughter bought a house last year and she's gotten multiple different tax bills. So it's pretty confusing sometimes. So the property taxes are going to be prorated on what the seller currently pays. Now, In some instances, a few years ago, the seller was paying more for their property taxes than the buyer was buying the house for because the property went down in value. These days, probably not, probably the opposite. So they're going to prorate the property taxes according to what the seller currently pays. Then you always caution the buyer, you're going to get a supplemental tax bill. It's going to be for the difference in if the seller is currently taxed on $300,000 and you're paying $400,000, you're going to get a tax bill for the tax on $100,000. If their taxes are impounded with their loan, that bill the supplemental tax bill does not go to the lender. Their regular tax bill goes to the lender and they just get a copy of it. But the supplemental tax bill comes to the borrower, not the lender. Sometimes I caution them and I tell them, look, if you don't remember this, just call me when you get it. Sometimes there's money in the impound account to pay the supplementals. In my daughter's case, she has a lot of extra money in there, but also lenders can only keep a certain amount of money in that escrow, that impound account. So depending on how long it takes for the supplemental tax bill to come. Now, my daughter bought a house, it's been a year this month, and she got that supplemental tax bill about 3 weeks ago. So sometimes it can be a long time. If the lender audits that account and sends the buyer back this big chunk of money, I always say, look, if you get like $700 or $800 from the lender, don't go spend it, because that's your supplemental tax money. You might need that to pay those supplemental taxes you're going to get if you haven't gotten it. So they usually forget all that, but you just say, look, this is kind of confusing. When you get the supplemental tax bill, just call me back. The next one talks about the scope of duties. So you're not responsible for advising that's outside of your scope of duty. You're not an electrician unless you are, or a plumber unless you are. So you're not responsible for that in your scope of representation. The bottom says this is joint escrow instructions. So, oops, where did it go? So joint escrow instructions, I tell them, look, we're going to provide a copy of this contract to the title company. So if we change anything on it, we have to give them something that's signed that said we agreed to change it. So not anything really to fill in there. On the next page, there's 2 paragraphs on this page that are initialed separately in the contract. And if they're not initialed by both parties, they're not part of the contract. So the first one under 21 is liquidated damages. So this basically means that if the buyer defaults on the contract, so they released all their contingencies, 17 days and 21 days. So they're moving forward. And a week before they're going to close, their dream house comes on the market and they don't want to buy this house anymore. Well, they can't be forced to buy the house, but they're going to lose however much that deposit was on that first page. That's what they risk. And you can only, the seller can only keep 3% of the sale price. So in this area, we don't see a lot of those really, really big deposits, but in Los Angeles, they pretty much require a 3% deposit. Now think about that, because a lot of, you're talking about $1 million, $2 million, $3 million properties. That's a lot of money to put a deposit for 3%. So if they initial that and the sellers initial it, it's part of the contract. If one or the other doesn't, then it's not. Usually the seller, if you don't initial it, usually you're going to get it back, where the seller's going to say, going to get a counter back and say, you need to initial liquidated damages, because it's in the best interest of the seller. That's how they get compensated for you canceling. The next part is dispute resolution. So first it talks about mediation. That doesn't have to be agreed on. All the parties agree to mediate. All right. Actually, there's kind of a thing before mediation, because you don't want any dispute between the buyer and the seller to get that far if you can all help it. So usually it's like the agents and the brokers and both the parties, you try to work it out ahead of time, okay, before mediation. But if you have you can go to mediation. The Lodi Association of Realtors has trained mediators that have been to the Pepperdine Mediation School. And so we have those people available if you would need to mediate. I've been, in 24 years, I've been to mediation one time. So the next part is arbitration. That's the second paragraph that is initialed by both parties. So they put this in the contract and they make it in big bold letters and all caps. And they tell you, this is a legal thing. Don't, you're not a lawyer, but they put it in our contract. So what are you going to do? You got to tell the people something. So they're basically, if they initial this and both parties do, they're agreeing to, if mediation doesn't work, to go to arbitration, binding arbitration. Okay. So they go before a retired justice or judge that has some real estate experience, and each party tells their side, and then the judge tells them what they have to do. Unlike mediation where it's voluntary, you can go before and the mediator says, well, you should do this. You're not obligated to do that under mediation. But under arbitration, you would be obligated to do whatever the judge said, hence why it's binding. So some people have had bad experiences with binding arbitration. They arbitrate labor disputes a lot. So some people might not want to sign that. Lawyers tend to, a lot of times, not want to sign that either. But what they tell us about arbitration is it's cheaper and quicker to go that way. If you don't arbitrate a dispute, you go to full-blown court, and that could be years and years and thousands of dollars. But so, the buyer, you give it the buyer the opportunity, they can do it or they cannot do it. All right. So the next part, we're almost to the end, talks about selection of providers and multiple listing service. And this can't be assigned. So you can't say this one party is going to buy it and then all of a sudden another party is buying it. It has to be approved by the seller. Nothing can be under 29, nothing can be changed on the form in any way, shape, or form unless it's in writing. So if you were to, on that first page under close of escrow, wrote 30 days or sooner, it's 30 days unless both parties agree to the or sooner. So even if they've, sometimes the buyers and the sellers encounter themselves in the grocery store and they get to talking and they agree to something, and so then you hear about it. If they've agreed to something, you need to put that in writing so that everybody knows about it. Paragraph 30 is definitions in the contract. And once again, probably one of the most important one is the days after. So everybody knows how the days are counted, because they're going to be scheduling their moving van as soon as they can. So they need to know what 30 days after acceptance means. So make sure that you go over it. If you're, then at the very bottom is expiration of offers. So if you don't fill anything in there as far as a date and a time, it's going to be 3 days after, on the third day after it's signed by the buyer. So if it's a hot listing, maybe you don't want to give the seller 3 days to accumulate a bunch of offers. You really want yours to be, the only one that there is, or the least amount of other offers that you're going to compete with. So you might put in something sooner than the 3 days. Just be aware that, if you're going to submit it on a Friday, what if the seller's out of town and they're not going to be back and they don't want to be hassled with it while they're out of town? You might not get that particular time frame, but you can at least try for it and kind of do the best for your client to try to get an answer sooner. So just don't forget to have your buyer initial at the bottom of every one of these pages. So on the other one, on the next page, there's a place here where the real estate brokers' names are. If you, once again, if you used MLS Connect, that's all going to be filled in for you with the broker, the license numbers and all that. So that's all going to be filled in. If you didn't do that, then you're going to have to fill it in yourself. There is a place on this page, at the bottom of the page, for the buyer to initial. Don't forget to have them initial the bottom of that page. So that is it for the contract. I don't know how many people we actually have. 49 people. I don't know if anybody has any questions. If you can, I think if you do a raise your hand, I might see it in this little participants window here. If you were to have any questions, or you can call me later if you want to ask any questions. I don't see anybody raising their hand. So we will move on. So the next part of our class, I'm going to take a drink of water here real fast. The next part of our class is going to be talking about preparing a counteroffer. So in this scenario, you're going to represent the seller. And just, this is a form, you'll see this recap of offer form. This is a form that I made up myself. There's one in Zip Forms, but I don't really like it, so I use my own. So I made this up. Feel free to print it and use it if you want to, or make up your own. It's kind of like the Reader's Digest. For those, I can't see any of you guys, so I don't know how young or old you are, but the Reader's Digest version of the contract. It hits kind of all the high points, the things that seller really wants to know about. So something like this is very helpful, especially when you have a lot of offers, because you can number them. So when you're talking to the seller, you can say, oh, well, offer number 1 or offer number 2, or you can refer to it as by the buyer's name, because that's all on there. So it has the offer price, escrow period, it has all those things, who's going to pay for what. And then down at the bottom, it has items to counter. So as I'm going through the contract, before I call the seller, while I'm going through there, I make notes at the bottom of things I see that I want to counter on. You know, the seller needs a longer escrow and they wrote a shorter escrow. So you're going to want to counter the day, you know, the close of escrow date, whatever that is. Seller, you know, the seller's not going to pay for the home warranty or any of those types of things. So it's good to note that on the bottom so you can discuss it when you're calling the seller. So make sure you always review the offer before you're meeting with the seller. Again, as you would review the, prepare the contract before you met with the buyer, you're going to review the offer before you talk with the seller on that. So this is a little helpful thing you can use it or not. So in our second exercise, we represent the seller now, and we got an offer on the property. So hopefully you look through that sample contract. And so we're going to prepare a counter offer, and the seller's instruction is they want 250,000, the purchase price to be 250,000, and they only want the credit to be $5,000, and they want possession to be 2 days after close of escrow. So when you get a contract, you need to go through it and look and see there's a lot of other things on there, and maybe the other agent wasn't as great an agent as you are, and they left things out that are pretty important. So we're going to look at the contract that we got for this seller. So this is the seller counter offer form. This is if you're dealing with only one offer. If you have multiple offers and you're going to be making multiple counter offers, there's a seller multiple counter offer form. If you're making multiple counter offers, do not use this one form. Otherwise, you could sell the house to multiple buyers. The difference between this form and the multiple counter offer form is there's an additional box in the body of the form. And let's say you send out 3 multiple counter offers and you get all 3 back. All the buyers say, yeah, we'll agree to whatever you countered. Well, then now you have to pick one. So the only one that's the winner is the one where the seller signs that additional box. And there's verbiage on there that lets the buyer know that just by signing this multiple counter offer doesn't mean you're going to be the winner of all the offers. This box has to be signed by the seller accepting the the final offer. Somebody else that wants to join. So that's it on the counteroffer. So here's our offer. And so you're going to start going through. And so the first thing you note is it's for 225,000. And the seller's already told you that he wants 250,000. So the first thing on your counteroffer is going to be purchase price to be 250,000. So next is close of escrow. You'll see there's nothing in that in those spots. You can't have a contract without an end date. You have to have an end date. So if you're writing contracts, never leave out the close of escrow date because it won't be valid. So now in our counteroffer, we're going to have to put something there. So we're going to put close of escrow to be 30 days. Now down at the bottom, you'll notice down at number 2 under agency and confirmation, this agent left your name blank. So you shouldn't, when you're going back to you're writing a contract, you should never, ever, ever, ever leave any of that part blank, especially so you know who you are. So you should fill that part in, and you know who the selling agent is, the seller's agent, because you went to the house, you had it on the MLS, and you saw the sign in the front yard. So never leave that blank, because now you have to either, if you don't put that in a counteroffer, you now have to do another separate confirmation of agency form, because that's one of the things that has, for agency, it has to be disclosed and confirmed. So on your counteroffer, you're going to put that your name from PMZ Real Estate represents the seller, okay? So next, in initial deposit, you'll notice that they put $500. That was the deposit in 1980, $500, because houses in 1980 were about, $50,000, $60,000. That is not much skin in the game for the buyer. So you would be representing your seller in a nice manner if you ask for the deposit be increased. You're going to want to at least put in a couple $1,000s there. That's the amount, remember, that the buyer is going to risk if they default. Someone might just default for $500. It's not that much money. They'll think twice if it's a couple $1,000. So in your counteroffer, you would put deposit to be whatever you want to be, $2,000, $5,000, whatever it might be. Okay. You'll notice on the loan that they didn't fill in any of the not to exceed rates. That's really not of your concern. So there's not any really thing to counter on that. But down on the bottom, additional financing term, it says seller to credit buyer 6% towards recurring and non-recurring closing costs. Now you have gotten instructions from the seller that he only wants to pay $5,000. So now you have to figure out what 6% of $250,000 would be, which is way more than $5,000. So you're going to want to figure that out. So on your counteroffer, you're going to put seller to credit buyer a maximum of $5,000. I forgot to say this when we were on the contract. So the credit to the buyer cannot be more than the closing cost, the credits for the closing costs. So if closing costs for a buyer are only $4,000 and the seller is going to give the buyer $5,000, the buyer doesn't get the extra $1,000 in cash from the seller. Can only give them what is closing costs. Well, and I always say this, you could give them the extra $1,000 in cash, but you could go to jail, and so could all the other parties. And I always tell people I don't look good in orange, because they put you in the orange jail jumpsuits and they parade you in front of the news media, because that is called loan fraud. So if you represent a buyer, before you go asking for a credit for closing costs, make sure that there's enough money, enough cost to cover, because you don't want to ask for more than you need. Because in essence, when you ask for a credit for closing costs, you're giving the seller less money for their house. So if you ask for $5,000 credit in closing costs and you're going to give the seller $250,000 for the house, you're really offering them $245,000 for the house, because it all is going to come off their bottom line. So, make sure in your, you address that reduction in the amount of the credit in your counter offer. So you're going to go down. You see they didn't change anything on loan and appraisal. You're going to go down to the bottom. Check seller's going to pay for the natural hazard. Now they chose to put in this offer that the seller's going to pay for a pest control report. This is the time where you really hope that when you were listing the house, the seller listened to you when you advised them to get reports ahead of time, like a pest report and a roof report, because they'll already have that and it won't be a problem and they'll know what they're dealing with. So if they put this, once again, this is on this contract, so the lender's probably going to want to see it at some point. The next part is the who pays for what. And you'll notice that they didn't fill in under escrow and title, they didn't fill in any title insurance information. So you might want to put on your counter offer that buyer to choose title company, whether you agree to, you and the other agent agree to whatever it's going to be, at least it's in writing that way. Says the seller's going to pay the county transfer tax. So you're probably going to want to tell them how much that is. Then down here under other costs, you'll say that the buyer's asking for the seller to do the Section 1 and Section 2 repairs. This is why you want to know how much those repairs might be. Because if you say, okay, we'll do those repairs, and you don't know how much they are, if you've had the report ahead of time, your sellers will be negotiating from a point of information, a point of knowledge. If you don't have a report and they say they're going to do that, you're obligating them to do whatever that report says. And what if it's $5,000? Maybe they wouldn't have taken the purchase price that they had. They wouldn't have gone with the purchase price if they knew they had this other repair that they were asking to be done, because that's all taken off their bottom line. So it's another reason to really encourage sellers to have those reports ahead of time. Now, you can also kind of protect your client by saying seller to approve/disapprove of any pest repairs. So that kind of protects them in the case that they maybe didn't follow your advice and have that inspection ahead of time. It kind of gives them a little bit of out that says, we're not going to, we disapprove of that. We're not going to pay for it. You'll notice that they didn't check who was going to pay for that home warranty company, home warranty plan, and they didn't put a not to exceed in. So you probably should address that. And home protection plan not to exceed $600. You split half each buyer or seller. You need to make sure that that is clear in the contract, because when you get to the title company, they're going to say, well, who's paying for that? It's not in the contract. All right. Then you're going to go down here at the bottom under 8. Under 8.2, you'll notice there's a little bitty check mark that says the refrigerator is included. This is something very important, because maybe the seller didn't say they wanted to leave the refrigerator, but the buyer really likes the refrigerator, and so they wrote it in. And if you miss that, and all of a sudden the seller has to leave their new $5,000 Samsung refrigerator because you didn't catch that the buyer included it in the sale, guess who's buying a refrigerator? It's gonna be you. And now, all of you are going to laugh, but when it happens to you, because it will happen, because you'll miss something somewhere along the line, you're going to remember what I'm going to tell you. When you have to buy the refrigerator, that is called a commissionectomy, because you are cutting your commission because you missed that refrigerator or the washer or dryer or the stove or whatever it might be. So make sure you're very careful. This is why you want to go over that contract before you start talking to the seller, to make sure that you catch that. Because if the seller says, you can say, well, the buyers are wanting your refrigerator. Do you want to leave your refrigerator? And if he says no, in your counter offer, you need to say refrigerator not included in sale. Otherwise, you're buying a refrigerator. It talks about at the bottom, closing in possession. So this says that the buyer's going to get possession at 10 a.m. on the day escrow closes, and your seller said, I want Tuesdays after escrow to move out. So you need to put that in your counter offer. Possession to be delivered no later than 2 days after close of escrow at whatever time the seller says, I want possession till 5 o'clock. Okay, at 5 o'clock. So it's a good thing also when you're making up these additions to the counter offer. If you're looking for a way to say something, how to put it on the counter offer, go back to where it says that on the contract and use those words as much as possible. They're written that way for a reason by the lawyers. They're to protect your client and they're to protect you. So you don't need to go off and trying to be a lawyer by writing your own verbiage. If you can use what's in the contract as much as possible, then that would be advantageous to you and advisable. So of course, at the bottom of the page, you're going to be having the seller sign all these things. It just clicked all the way back. Oh, I think we skipped a page. We must have skipped a couple of pages. Hold on, let me get back to where I was. I lost my place. Refrigerators. Okay. Closing in possession. All right. So if the seller wants to remain in possession longer than a couple of days, you're going to fill out that C at the top of page 4. And there's an actual form that it's called seller in possession that you're going to fill out and addresses what the rent's going to be and those types of things. Talks about tenant occupied property. Once again, if the seller wants to live in it and there's a tenant in it, I would highly recommend that tenant be out before you close escrow, because you could get in a whole lot of trouble if the tenant doesn't want to move out, because your buyer is inheriting that tenant and they still have all the rights that they would have. Talks about all the disclosures and so on. You hope that you have all those already filled out and gone over with the seller. Make sure that they filled in all of the blanks, otherwise they're not complete. You go on to the next page, it talks about the condition. You can talk about what inspections the buyer might have and how that will work. Talks about that the seller has to disclose known material facts. The title investing really doesn't apply to the seller, more to the buyer. This is where you talk about the time periods for all the inspections and the delivering of reports and how all that works, like we talked about in the other contract. You need to talk about with the seller about what happens if he doesn't perform, and what happens if the buyer doesn't perform in doing the notice to buyer to perform or the demand to close escrow, how that all works, and that those things all have to be done in writing. Talks about prorations of property taxes a lot. This is more for a buyer. Talks about escrow instructions. Now here's where it comes to those two contracts that are initialed separately in the contract. So you'll notice on this contract that the buyer didn't initial the liquidated damages. So you're going to want to note that, and you're going to want to discuss it with the seller and explain what the liquidated damages are. And you, in this, most sellers want that initial. You have the right, the seller has the right to ask the buyer to initial it. If I were to have gotten this contract and that was missing, I would call the agent and say, I noticed the the buyer missed initialing the liquidated damages on the contract. Was that on purpose or a mistake? Because most times, generally, it's a mistake. The buyer, you know, because there's then 3 places on this page that a buyer's going to initial. And if there's a husband and wife, sometimes one initials it and one misses it. So you could kind of stave off a lot of problems by just calling the agent and say, did you mean that? And he'll say, oh my gosh, no, I didn't realize. Let me get that page to you. They can get you that page with the initial on it, and then you're good. But in this case, we didn't get it. So you can put on your counter offer, buyer to initial liquidated damages. And just make sure if you ask them to do that, you in fact get the page with the liquidated damages initialed on it as well. Same with arbitration, and be very, you know, be mindful if there's a husband and wife that both of them have initialed in all the spaces. If not, again, call and say, you know, so-and-so missed this. Could you get them to initial? Because it appears like they meant to, but one of them missed that one spot. The next part is just the regular, again, talk to the seller about what days after means. That the definition of that, so everybody's counting the days on the same time. On page 10, that's where you would check the box under 32, since we're giving them a counter offer. So you're going to check that box as seller's acceptance is subject to the attached counter offer, and it's dated there. And then you're going to have your seller sign, and then you're going to have them sign the counter offer. So I always explain to them, we're going to accept this contract, except for all these things in the counter offer that we've changed. So we're good with everything else. We're just changing these things here. So again, they didn't put in your information, so therefore you have to fill in all that information and make sure that the buyer initialed on the bottom of that page 10, because they miss it a lot of times. So that's kind of it for the counter offer. And I must have talked really fast because I have like 15 extra minutes, but are there any questions on anything? Once again, if you want to call me later, if you have a question, you're certainly more than welcome to do that. I'm going to try to go back to participants and stop the share. There we go. So I know I talked really fast, but I'm really glad that you all were able to get on here. It looks like we ended up with 46 people. Oh, there's something in the chat. I can't see the chat when I'm sharing my screen. Yep. And no questions in the chat. So anyway, if there's no questions, good luck with everything you're gonna do, and stay up on all the new coronavirus forms, because they're changing on a daily basis a lot of times. So anyway, thank you so much for attending this, and probably see you all in the Gov Hutchinson update next Tuesday. So thanks so much for coming.